So writing a sermon and preaching can be a lot of work, and understandably, we want people to be able to learn and engage with the content that we give them. And so in this episode, we're going to share with you 5 ways to help people stay more engaged during your sermon.
Welcome back to Practical Church Planting, where in 15 minutes or less, we'll give you practical tips, advice, and encouragement to help you plant and grow healthy churches. My name is Brian Androsian. Joining me, as always, Dylan Dodson. And today we're talking about 5 ways to keep people more engaged during your sermons.
So we've talked about different ways to, in some of our preaching episodes, about how to be engaging while you preach. So not so much talking about how to be engaging, but how to keep people that are listening to be engaged during the actual sermon. We've talked about services, all that stuff. This is just the sermon. So we've got a couple things to share, ways that you can keep people engaged during the sermon.
More engaged.
Number 1 is notes. Now, I wasn't a huge fan of note stuff for a while, but then I realized people, because for me, I'm not a note taker.
Yeah.
I just am not really, I don't learn that way. But a lot of people are. Mm-hmm. And so providing people that are note takers the ability to take notes is helpful. And what do we mean is, and if you're watching this, the video version, here's a recent example. If you want to zoom in, I don't really know. Yeah, there we go. And basically, here's what we do. We take our main points, we follow our outline, which we have one of our episodes, I think, in the 40s and 50s on using a sermon outline.
Yep.
And pretty much all of our main points are bolded on the screen. There's either a word or 2 words bolded on each screen for the main points. We might have anywhere between 5 to 8 main points. Mm-hmm. Well, not necessarily the main points, but points.
Yeah.
During the sermon. And so they'll be on the screen, and one or two of the words will also be bolded a certain color depending on their series graphics and all that sort of thing. And so then our handouts that we print out have fill in the blank notes. So the top half is fill in the blank, the bottom half is just notes with lines that you can write stuff on. And so giving people a place to take notes helps them stay more engaged, especially if they're note takers. And because too, not everyone's going to bring paper or pen or have stuff to write with. Like when you provide all that for them, especially if they're note takers, it helps people stay engaged. And we've seen people, I'm not a note taker, so it was somewhat surprising to me that people have actually been using these since we introduced them. So
yeah, I grew up in a church that did this, and when it was kind of presented to us, it was, to me, in my mind, it was kind of like an old church kind of thing.
Totally.
Because I am a big note taker, but if I want to take notes, I bring a notebook with me and a pen. So I just thought if someone's a note taker, they're already going to be prepared with it. However, like you said, we've seen people use them. We see them get taken every week, and and even myself, weeks where I forget to grab a notebook, and I thank God that it's there because I have something to write on. But we've seen people actually take them and stay more engaged because of it.
I think that's helpful too, because if you're like me and you're not a note taker, or you're like you and you are, you just assume that you're never going to take notes or you're always going to be prepared. But if you forget something, or if you're new and you're just trying to figure things out and you're not sure, like maybe you don't know that note taking is a thing, or you feel intimidated to take notes.
Yeah.
But if someone, if this is something they provide for you, and I've seen people take pictures of them and remember them. And so again, if you're not a note taker, maybe it doesn't matter, or if you bring your own stuff, but there's a lot of people that don't and would, I think, be helped by it. And so one way is to actually print out notes, and we print it out ourselves. We don't use someone else. We print it on cardstock. We do I think 2 per page, cut them in half, just do them black and white.
Yep.
And it's a simple, not very expensive way to keep people engaged.
Yeah.
And so that's one way is to print out, fill in the blank notes. Here's another way is to use more slides. And we've talked about this in some of the preaching stuff, but we'll recash it here a little bit. I remember, some point last year, I was, reading about presenting and just, stuff trying to get better. And this one lady who is a coach on communicating, public speakers, all that sort of thing, talked about how the use of slides is actually really good and actually helps people engage because of brain psychology. And so she, for example, was doing this thing with a bunch of people that she was teaching how to public speak, and she used tons of slides.
Yeah.
Now, when she used a slide, to be clear, there's only one main point, or one sentence or one phrase per slide. Because if you have multiple things on a slide, people are going to read everything before they start listening to you. So use more slides. Don't use fewer slides with a lot of information.
Yeah.
And she said she had 200 slides in her presentation.
Jeez.
And everybody assumed she only used 50 to 60.
Interesting.
So they thought she used 25%
of what she did.
Because it was engaging, it didn't seem overwhelming, it didn't seem like a lot because there was 1 point per slide. And when people see something change on the screen, whether your screens are behind you or beside you, it kind of gives their eye something to look at to kind of re-engage them if they're kind of wandering or looking around the room.
Yep.
And so I would recommend using more slides, 1 point per slide. We don't have a ton of them, but before even the 5 to 8 and then maybe 1 or 2 quotes, if that, I would only have like a slide or 2 the whole time. Like I hardly had anything.
Yeah.
And I even had people say like, it would be helpful to have more stuff, but that's just not how I learn.
Right.
And so I think it's just a way to help people of different learning spectrums or experiences or how they learn to give them different options. So whether that's note taking or more slides, It helps people re-engage when they see something change.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. It helps keep their focus because it's something different going on.
Yeah.
Regardless of how engaging of a speaker you are, if someone's just looking at you for 20, 30, 40, 50 minutes, even if you're great, it's still a lot of times, especially if somebody's not super, I don't know, maybe not really into the topic that you're covering, or it's their first time there, it might be hard for them to really connect with you and stay focused for that long of a time.
Yep.
And so having slides just constantly, not constantly, but changing a lot helps kind of rein them back in, kind of bring them back into reality.
And it engages more senses. So normally you're just listening and hearing, and then you have the seeing component. And I think, too, having slides helps people write notes down if they are note takers, especially if you don't have fill-in-the-blank notes.
Yeah,
and
that's
it's
a good one.
What did they say? So it helps them write notes, and it helps emphasize points if they're on the slide. Maybe they didn't quite hear you. And so that's number 2, is have more slides. Only 1 point, phrase, or sentence per slide. But don't be afraid to have multiple of them if there's only one, because research shows it helps people keep people engaged.
Yep.
Here's number 3, and we've talked about this in some of our preaching episodes, the importance of using humor and stories. So this one is more so on the preacher themselves during the sermon than the rest of these 4.
Right.
But using more humor and stories, because you're not giving a lecture. And I've shared this before. The hardest thing that I do today was sermon prep day for me, and didn't go very well, is not necessarily learning the text and kind of explaining what it means, but it's keeping it engaging and interesting. So using humor and stories to break up, to illustrate what you're teaching, but also to rein people in. I was reading a preaching book recently, and the guy said, which was very true, he was talking about how he went to these 2 summer camps when he was in high school.
Yeah.
One summer camp, he doesn't remember anything that was taught and anything that was said by the speaker. He's like, I'm sure the speaker did great, but I don't remember. The other one, he said, I can still tell you today things that I took away and I learned. And he says, people don't like to say this, but it is true. He said, the only difference between those 2 speakers is that one was funny and one wasn't.
Yep.
So he had a couple chapters on being funny. He's not saying, like, if you're not a funny person, he's not trying to say, like, fake it or like be someone you're not. But the reality of the situation is humor brings people in. It draws people in. It brings their guard down. And so not being afraid, and I don't know, there's debate, should you use humor in sermons or should you not? I would just say, if you want to engage people,
totally,
and if you want people that aren't Christians or maybe young believers to listen to what you have to say, because it's not fair to assume that everyone's just going to want the Bible taught if they don't even know who Jesus is. They don't, how you're going to get there.
Yeah.
So using humor and stories allows people to come back in during your sermon. So if you got 30, 40 minutes and you've only got even one, that's not enough. Like, I would try as best as you can, every 5 to 7 minutes, have something, or 5 to 10 minutes. It doesn't have to be a long story. It could be something quick or something anecdotal, but something to give their people's minds a break. And if they've wandered, an easy entry point back to engaging again.
Yeah, I think that this is a big one. I get that there's a debate, but I don't think that there should be. I think if people are laughing, they're listening. It means that they're engaged, that they're paying attention to what you're saying. And we said this before a while ago. You had told a story. This is more related to using illustrations and stories. But you had told a story about how someone remembered an illustration from one of your sermons, and they didn't remember the point, but they remember the story, and they kind of apologized for it. I've had that happen where most of the times when I've preached, a handful of people will, a couple days later, remember or relate to some, not joke, but some like kind of funny thing. And it's always one thing. Maybe I'm not that funny, but it's always like one thing, only one thing that sticks out. But I have multiple people reference it. And to me, it's like, hey, if 2 days later, if you remember that I opened my mouth on Sunday, then I'm happy. Like, that something happened. And so I think that it helps people stay engaged, especially if you're on something that's a little heavier, which a lot of the Bible is a little heavier. It gives people's mind just a break and gives them a chance to breathe a little bit.
And I always said, too, because people are going to remember stories and humor, you should be intentional with them. So the point you were saying, they didn't remember the point, but then they told me the story and reiterated what I was saying.
Yeah.
And so it's like, you did know it. You just didn't know the exact wording of it. So use humor and stories, use them, work hard on them. Don't be lazy about not including them in your sermons. So that's number 3. Here's number 4, going back to things that aren't so much based off the preacher themselves on Sunday morning, is the number of chairs in your space. I think episode 22, if I remember, we have something like that. I could be wrong. But anyway, we talk about why you should put down chairs. So you should put down less chairs than you need. We should go into it because it's something I think most churches should do and they don't do. If I could say, like, here's like one of the biggest things you should do. The point is simply was you don't want to have way too many seats and people sitting not close to you, or because everyone sits in the back, everyone not feeling like there's a place to sit, even though there's tons of seats up front.
Yeah.
Here's the thing when it comes to number of chairs. If you're in a space that is way too big, people are distracted. They're looking around. They might feel like this is kind of awkward. And I get if you're in a school, something like that, you can't pull up the chairs, but you got to think of pipe and drape. Like you've got to do something. If your space is too big and there's way too many empty chairs, that affects the mood, the energy. People are spread out. And then on the other token, if you're completely full, that's also not good. Now, it might be good for the preacher because you like that it's full, but people don't want to be all over each other. And in our culture today, it is what it is. Like I know we could say people shouldn't mind sitting next to each other, but they do. And so you want people to sit next to each other, but if all of your chairs are completely full, then you need to go to another service. You need to find something. Like for us recently, the way we do our chairs in our space, we just changed it because in our second service, it was completely full. Although we prefer that setup because there's more energy, we rearranged the chairs that allows us to fit more chairs in our space, because although we like that it was full, people don't like it as full, especially new people. They feel like there's no room for them. And so if you have way too much space, I would say try to pick up your chairs or try to use pipe and drape, do something. And if you don't have enough space at all, go to another service or add more chairs, because either one of those extremes can make it hard for people to focus.
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway from this one is do whatever you can to make sure that your space isn't a distraction. Whether it's having too many chairs, not enough chairs, whatever it is. I think chairs is kind of one of the easier ones to control. Some things, because of space, are kind of out of your control, but make sure that however your space is set up, however many people you're expecting, it's not going to be a distraction, whether they're wondering why they're the only person in their entire row or they're afraid to get up to go to the bathroom because they're going to have to step over 20 people to get out or something, where they're so cramped in that they can't move. But I think just taking out as many distractions as there's going to be, because there's always going to be some, but eliminating as much as possible is going to help people stay engaged.
And here's the thing. If you feel uncomfortable or feel a little awkward, feel like it's way too full or not enough, they feel it too.
Yeah, they definitely
And so
do.
you want to try to make the number of chairs a priority. That'll help people stay engaged. And then here's number five. And this one goes back on to the preacher himself, is the length. And we've talked about this a lot, so we won't reiterate it too much. But we have this idea in church world, pastor world, that like longer sermon equals better and more spiritual, and that's just not true. If you go too long, then people will get bored, they'll tune out, they'll forget what you said, and people care about how they felt, which I know this might seem vain or whatever, but again, we're trying to reach people who don't know Jesus and help people grow in their relationship with Jesus. So if you want a bunch of super spiritual Christians, that's great, but that's all you're going to have if you don't take some of these things seriously. And so if you go too long, people are going to be bored. They're going to view you as a boring communicator, as someone who goes too long. They're not going to remember your stuff. And so the length of your sermon really matters. I said this before, when we launched New City Church, which I know in some church world, it's like, oh my gosh, my goal was 25 minutes because I wasn't good enough. Like I just wasn't. And then it was 30, and now it's 30 to 35, and it's kind of staying there because it's just, I'm not good enough to go to 40 minutes, and I just don't want to bore people. I think very few people are good enough to go to 45 minutes and over and keep people engaged. Very few people are. And if you're not sure if that's you or not, it's probably not.
It's not. Sorry.
And so length. And so again, you could have the best sermon, you could have all these things in the right chairs, you could have slides, you could have fill in the blank notes, but if it is too long, it drags on, people will disengage and they'll stop listening.
Yeah, I think here that takes a lot of self-awareness that you're probably not one of the top 1 or 5% of communicators in the world that's good going 50 or 60 minutes, and it's nothing wrong with that. It's just realizing that you are who you are and you want people to be engaged, and trying to unload a dump truck of information on them and go 50 minutes is going to disengage them, and they're not going to walk away remembering anything. And the other thing I'll say in regards to this is, figure out what a good length is and stick with it, but also, well, I just said it, but also stick with it. Make sure people know when they're going to be getting out, and that it's not 1 week it's 25 and next week you're going 40, and it's just this kind of however long I want to preach kind of thing. But plan to go, practice. We talk about that a lot. Practice, plan to go how long you're going to go, and make that a predictable thing. Make people know.
And with the link too, like with any church event, maybe we should do an episode on this, is that one of the biggest indicators of whether or not people will come back or not in their mind is if they know what to expect. If they don't know what to expect, then they're not going to come. This is why Star Wars, for example, always sells out, because people know what to expect. Or like your favorite things that you go to, like you like certain restaurants, right? Because you know what to expect. And so if they're like, I don't know if they're going to go 50 minutes or 30 minutes, or if it's going to be good or boring, they're just, people aren't going to come back because they don't know what to expect. So being consistent with that is important. So again, that is 5 ways that you can engage people, keep people engaged better during the sermon. Fill in the blank notes, have more slides on your screen, use humor and stories, be intentional about the number of chairs, and then focus on not making your sermon too long. So thanks for being with us. If you have a specific question you guys want us to cover, go to practicalplanting.com/questions, and we'll talk about it in a future episode. And until then, we'll be with you next time on Practical Church Planting. Thanks so much for watching this episode of Practical Church Planting. Whether you're watching on Facebook or YouTube or Practical Planting, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, make sure you like or subscribe or do whatever it's telling you to do or should do on that platform.
And hey, if you are so tired of looking at our ugly faces, but you're not tired of listening to our beautiful voices, then you can find our podcast if you just search Practical Church Planting on iTunes or Google Play. Make sure not to just find it, not just to listen, but to subscribe.
Make sure you subscribe. Brian, tell them to subscribe.
Subscribe.
See you next time.